Have you ever looked at a piece of technology and seen something else? Not just what it is, but what it could be? Well, today we're talking about a guy who looked at a massive, humming supercomputer and didn't just see a black box. Nope, he heard an orchestra, just waiting for its conductor. So who's the man behind that incredible quote? That's Philip Emeagwali. He's a computer scientist, a mathematician, a physicist, a true visionary. For him, a supercomputer wasn't just a fancy calculator. It was a brand new kind of instrument. This is the story of how he learned to play it, and in doing so, basically wrote the rhythm for all of modern computing.
Now, every story has a beginning, right? And Emeagwali's doesn't start in some high-tech lab. It starts in colonial Nigeria. And that experience, that worldview, it's what gave him this totally unique way of solving problems that, honestly, most people couldn't even see.
Just look at this timeline for a second. It tells you so much. On the one hand, you've got this kid who's so good at math, his friends literally call him calculus. But on the other, the Biafran War hits and he's forced out of school, living in a refugee camp. That kind of thing could break anyone. But for him, it just lit a fire. He taught himself, kept pushing, and eventually that drive won him a scholarship to America.
So getting to the US wasn't the finish line, not even close. It was actually the start of this new, very deliberate campaign. See, Emeagwali knew that to solve the kind of massive problems he was interested in, what scientists call grand challenges, you couldn't just be an expert in one thing. You had to forge a whole new kind of mind.
18 years. I mean, just let that sink in. This wasn't just some guy collecting degrees for fun. This was a mission. He was systematically building an intellectual arsenal, piece by piece, getting ready to take on problems that the world's best scientists thought were pretty much unsolvable.
And this was his strategy: become a polymath. So why? Well, think about it. The computer scientists were building these incredibly powerful machines, but they didn't know what to do with them. The physicists, they understood the laws of nature, but they didn't know the most advanced computing techniques. Emeagwali knew he had to be the bridge. He had to be the one person who could connect these different worlds to do something nobody else could.
But, this path was anything but easy. He basically ran into two giant walls. The first was the scientific community itself, which was super skeptical of his wild ideas. And the second, the deep systemic racism that tried to keep him from even having a seat at the table.
Okay, so here's the core of the disagreement. The old way, vector supercomputing, was like having one single genius athlete trying to win the whole game by themselves. Emeagwali's idea, which he actually got from looking at honeycombs in nature, was to use a whole team, thousands of simpler processors all working together. It just seemed crazy to a lot of people. They called it voodoo math. They just couldn't hear the music he was trying to create.
And this is where that second wall becomes painfully real. He's invited to give a job lecture at the University of Michigan. On paper, they loved his ideas. But when he showed up and they saw he was a black African man, they were shocked. The job was canceled, not because his ideas were flawed, but because of who he was. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes, even being a genius isn't enough to overcome prejudice.
But Emeagwali was not going to be silenced. When the conventional path was blocked, he just found another one. He decided he was going to conduct the biggest computational orchestra the world had ever seen, and he was going to do it remotely to prove his voodoo math was the real deal.
And this was the grand challenge he picked. He wanted to accurately simulate how oil flows in an underground reservoir. I know it sounds a little obscure, but it's an unbelievably complex physics problem. Using a traditional supercomputer back then to solve it would be like trying to map the entire world on foot. It was considered practically impossible.
So the answer to that 180-year question, you guessed it, 65,536 processors. From his own workstation, Emeagwali took control of one of the most powerful and notoriously difficult machines in the world, the connection machine. He taught tens of thousands of individual computer brains how to work together as one. And here's the beauty of how he did it. He chopped up that massive oil field problem into thousands of tiny little pieces. He gave each processor its own little puzzle to solve. But, and this is the key part, he programmed them to constantly talk to their neighbors. And the result? It was a true symphony of computation. They solved the problem at a speed that absolutely shattered world records, and he proved, once and for all, that his nature-inspired idea worked.
So this wasn't just some victory in an academic journal. The principles that Emeagwali proved that day, well, they sent out echoes that have totally reshaped the world we live in. The music he wrote became the soundtrack for our digital age.
And this is why this story matters so much today. The breakthrough he had is literally the foundation for technologies we all depend on. Every single time you check a detailed weather forecast, you're seeing his work in action. The giant supercomputers that are training today's most powerful AI, they're all built on the massively parallel architecture that he championed. His discovery is how we solve the biggest, most complex computational problems facing us as a species.
You know, in his own words, he just summed it all up perfectly. The critics, the skeptics, all those committees that shut him down, in the end, their opinions didn't matter. What mattered was that the world's scientists and engineers, they heard his song and they started singing along. They adopted his method and they started building the future on top of it.
And that's really the final challenge he leaves for us, isn't it? He showed the world a whole new way to listen, a brand new song to play. So the question for us is, what song are you going to write to change the world?